Well, guys, it's been a day since I was down here working on this thing and said I was going to pretty much give up on this, but I wanted to try one more thing. I ended up going online and doing some more research, and this is a good example of how the internet, can be great, and then sometimes it can be sometimes it's a blessing, sometimes it's a curse, I guess is what I'm trying to say. There's so much information out there regarding, Xboxes and, well, anything for that matter, that is put out there by people, just trying to give their best guess. And lots of times they're rehashing information that they glean from some other source. Case in point, I'm about to give you some information that I got off the internet. You're going to have to judge for yourself whether or not this information is helpful or whether or not you want to completely ignore it. But in my case, the reason why I did this was because that red-green flashing light thing, and in countless forums, I saw posts by people that said that that indicated things like frag error, and a lot of people said, well, it's an EEPROM problem, it's a problem with your EEPROM. All of these things which would make it more of a catastrophic type failure, or a failure that would be a lot harder to repair. And I didn't want to accept that, because if the EEPROM in this case was the culprit, I mean, pretty much that means that the chip is either bad or the data on the chip is corrupt. Well, then why would I be able to get it to, after multiple tries, get it to actually boot or do something? Like I was able to get into the menu and start reading the, look at those, literally play audio files off the drive, look at the saved data of previous games played, all of that. So went back and found out that when the message came up that tells you that your unit requires service, I don't know if those of you more astute observers probably noticed that up in the corner here there's a number 12, and that number that appears up in that left-hand corner is actually an error code. And I was able to find out that an error 12 means that the DVD drive parameters are out of range, I believe is what the technical mumbo-jumbo is. But in other words, the unit basically does a self-test of the drive, and at power-up, if it doesn't find what it likes coming back from information from the drive, it's going to throw that error. That, coupled with the fact that I was able to get it to kind of work, but it would start loading, and then it didn't want to, it started to load the game and then stopped. All of that points to a drive problem. So the good news is, very high probability that the rest of my Xbox is perfectly fine, even the hard drive. Bad news is, I still get a problem with the drive. The other thing I learned about the drives is on the original Xboxes, there were primarily three major manufacturers that supplied drives. And the good news is that all three of those are pretty much interchangeable and plug and play. In other words, for instance, this drive right here, based on the fact that it has this part number right here, SDG-605, and it actually says designed by Toshiba Samsung Storage Technology. Well, the SDG-605 is actually a Samsung part number. So this is a Samsung drive. The other drive manufacturer apparently was, I think, Philips and Thomson. I'm going by memory. You can look it up if you want. The most important thing to know is that of all the drives that they put in the the original Xbox, I almost said 360, the original Xbox, the Samsung was the best drive. It was considered to be the least problematic. And the Philips, I guess, by far was like the worst. I'm going by memory. If I've got that wrong as far as the names go, I'll put it up on the screen when I'm editing. But the point is, the Samsung drive is the best drive. And there's plenty of information on how to tweak this drive online. You could tweak the other drives, but in the case of the Philips drive, one of the forums that I was reading, where I got a lot of this information from, based on what the guy was writing, he really knows his stuff as far as Xboxes go. He was basically saying the problem with the Phillips drive is it's such a problematic drive that even if you do some of the tweaks on that drive and get it working, it's probably only going to work for a few weeks and then quickly start crapping out on you again. As opposed to the Samsung drive, if you're having problems with it, you might be able to tweak it and actually affect a repair that's fairly long lasting. It talked about a problem with ejecting on these. I'm not going to get into that because I think I've got my eject problem licked by just taking care of that belt. But let's take this apart and see if we can't see what they're talking about as far as tweaking this thing goes. And this is something that I used to do back in the days of when I was servicing DVD players and CD players. Alright, so I've got the top cover of the drive off, and you can see this is the optic block assembly right here we talked about, and you can see this little ribbon cable right here. Well, if you remove this ribbon cable by pulling it out very gently, you can actually expose what I'm trying to look at in here, but also I'm pretty sure, yeah, you can see it actually by taking the bottom cover off. But it's still not going to be an easy thing to get to. And this board's not even screwed in. This pops right out. So just pull on this tab right here, and I can unplug this, flip this up out of the way, push this down out of the way. And what I'm trying to get to is I'm trying to get to this little tiny potentiometer. A potentiometer is a variable resistor. This little tiny device right here is actually a potentiometer. For short, we like to call them trim pots. Basically what this is a variable resistor. And the job of this particular little sucker right here is this is how you adjust the current that's available to flow to the laser diode. So by adjusting that, you can actually turn up or turn down the laser. Now, if you turn it up too far, if you allow too much current to flow to the laser, it's going to burn, it's going to cause the laser to fail prematurely. So basically, if you can turn this up a little bit and get the laser to put out enough light to actually start working correctly again, great. If you can't, then it means your laser's just too tired and it needs to be replaced. Of course, you also want to make sure that your lens is clean, because you don't want to you don't want to find out that the reason why it's not working well is because your lens was so dirty it was diffusing the laser light coming out. Well, we've already tried the cleaning and that didn't work. So the next thing would be to try this. Would be to try and adjust this. And they recommend a very specific way to adjust this. Now, in a true professional service situation, back in the day when I had a service repair shop and did this kind of work on high-end DVD players and whatnot, we had a actual specific procedure that we would go through that was in the service manual. We also had other equipment available that I no longer have, like a laser light meter, which was basically, it was like a little paddle you could actually literally hold over the objective lens, and it would measure the intensity of the laser light output. So we don't have that available, so we are going to do it the down and dirty way, which is how they're doing it online, which is what they're doing is with the power off, they're actually measuring the resistance in circuit of that potentiometer, and then they're tweaking the potentiometer and changing that resistance a little bit at a time. So this is kind of a painstaking, tedious deal here, because you gotta basically, you're gonna measure it, see what it is, you're gonna change it, then you're gonna test it, see if your problem goes away. If it doesn't, then you're gonna take it apart, do it again, change it again, and keep doing that. And then you're only going to change it in small increments, like 50 to 100 ohms each time, and you're not going to go below a certain threshold value of resistance, because at that point you're just getting to where you're going to be frying the laser anyways. All right, so for those of you who know about these drives, you'll know that the general consensus is not to tweak this pot on a Samsung drive. You want to do it on a Thomson or a Philips, go right ahead. But this drive is considered to be such a good drive that it's widely considered to be a big no-no to try and tweak the pot on this drive. That if you're having issues with this drive, they tend to say, probably something else and not the actual drive itself. A couple of the possibilities are problems with these slides right here not being lubricated anymore. This little worm drive right here, screw deal, could be a problem. Okay. And also, one of the big things, which is something I missed because it's been a long time since I worked on one of these, is the fact that when I cleaned this the other day, all I cleaned was the objective lens assembly, which is the movable lens assembly that actually can move. The reason why it kind of like feels like spongy when you touch it with the swab is because it's actually able to move in and out, and that's what focuses the laser beam. Well, what I forgot about is that behind that there is the actual lens on the laser itself, and to clean that, well, that's a little bit of a different kettle of fish. You got to get this little plastic cover off. All right, so what I've done is I've removed that little cover, pushed it up out of the way, and I flattened out a Q-tip by pulling some of the fibers and saturated it with the denatured alcohol, the isopropanol alcohol, and cleaning the larger lens that's underneath here. And you're going to be real careful because there are tiny, tiny little wires that this thing is floating on. And if you damage those, well then, it's over, Johnny. Now I've reseated that little plastic cover. Okay, here goes nothing. Oh, still getting the number 12 error. What a rip. That's weird. It doesn't sound like it's spinning now. There we go. Again, back to the 10 try deal. See if it loads the game now. Last time I got it to get that EA Sports logo to start, and then, yeah, can't recognize the disc. Make sure it's an Xbox game. Well, obviously it's an Xbox game because it is. Here's the Harry Potter game that I had taken out the other day. Oh, maybe this is the one I got to load that, and then it wouldn't load any further. Well, that's further than it went last time.
If Harry Potter goes back to Hogwarts, he will be in mortal danger.
Says you. Just for the heck of it, I'll continue the game. These are the saves that are actually in there. Yeah, it's accessing the hard drive. How cool is that? Yeah, whatever you're doing there. Let's see. Would you like to save at this point? No, I'm not ready to do that. I have no idea what I'm doing. Oh, what's that, a fart? Oh. Alright, so I just quit the game. Let's shut this off and see what happens. Well, everybody, I was down here this morning messing with this thing, and I had cleaned that lens that's underneath the moving lens and had reassembled it. And initially I was getting the same error, but after I tried a few times, I actually got it to start working, and I actually got it to load the game, and I actually was even playing the game. The memory card filled up on the camera, so I had to stop. And this is actually that's actually fine, because I wanted to see what would happen now from a cold start. I have a theory as to why I was initially still getting errors. I was thinking that since I had just cleaned the lens, it's possible that not all of the residue of the alcohol had a chance to completely evaporate and go away. So it's quite possible that that was affecting it, and that all it needed was, a couple more minutes. If that's the case, then when I try it right now from a cold start, it should just work right off the bat and not give me any errors. And then if that's the case, then I would feel comfortable that maybe I've got the problem licked and could reassemble it and give it a final test before I turn it over to the kiddies. See, I'm getting that stupid error right off the bat. This is still a sick puppy. Still a sick puppy. It's got to be drive related though, because, well, 12 is, again, it has to do with the drive. I even got this NASCAR game to load. Well, that's taking a lot longer. It's not giving me the errors, it's just doing nothing. It's just hanging. Okay, I just tried reseating the IDE cable on the PC board. I hadn't done that yet. Well, that ain't the answer. Well, that's interesting. I took the cover off, turned it upside down, and it loaded that time. I know it's going to load because if this white Microsoft comes up at the bottom there, it usually doesn't throw the error. Although it is saying it doesn't recognize the disk. I gotta kind of hold this while I eject it. No, the disk is going to fall out if I do that. Oh, wait a minute. There's a problem with the disk you're using. It may be dirty or damaged. That's funny. That's a different message than the other one. Hey, bet you shouldn't run this with the cover off very long, because I just found out that this IC chip right here gets very hot, and either there's a short in that chip or this cover is responsible for being the heat sink for that puppy. Yeah, right there, that little indentation of metal there with the hole in it lines up with that chip.